Jack trudged along the quiet road, his boots heavy after another exhausting night shift. His little girl rested against his shoulder, her soft breathing the only thing keeping him grounded. The first light of dawn painted the world in gray, and he longed for nothing more than to collapse into bed. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he caught something unusual in the woods, a flicker of movement, almost too faint to notice. Curiosity mixed with unease, pulling him off the path. As he stepped closer, his pulse quickened. At first, he thought his tired eyes were playing tricks on him. But then the sight struck him like a blow to the chest. There, tied cruelly against a tree, was a young woman. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, her wrists bound tightly with rope. Bruises marked her arms, and her eyes widened with silent desperation when she saw him. But it wasn't just her suffering that froze Jack in place, it was the sign hanging around her neck. The words were jagged, written in anger, "White man don't forgive." For a long moment, Jack couldn't breathe. He was just an ordinary man, barely making ends meet, carrying the weight of fatherhood alone. And yet here was a stranger, bound in pain and fear, looking at him as though he were her only chance at survival. His daughter shifted slightly in his arms, and her innocence contrasted sharply with the brutality before him. Jack's heart pounded, knowing he had stumbled into something that could change everything. Jack's chest tightened as he stood frozen, torn between instinct and fear. He had no idea who the woman was or why someone had left her like this, but every bone in his body screamed that stepping in could mean danger. He wasn't a hero, just a janitor working long nights to feed his little girl. Trouble was the last thing he needed. His mind raced, what if whoever had done this was still nearby? What if they came back? He looked down at his daughter, still resting against him, her small hand curled trustingly around his shirt. He couldn't risk her safety. But then, as if sensing the tension in her father's heartbeat, the little girl stirred. Her sleepy eyes blinked open, and she caught sight of the woman bound to the tree. In the softest voice, she whispered, "Daddy, she's crying, please help her." The words cut through Jack's hesitation like a blade. He felt a lump rise in his throat. Children see the world with a kind of purity adults lose. No fear of consequences, no calculations, just the raw instinct to care. Jack realized that walking away would mean teaching his daughter the cruelest lesson, that compassion had limits, that some people's pain could be ignored. He clenched his jaw, took a steadying breath, and shifted his daughter gently to the ground. "Stay here, baby," he said softly, his voice trembling but firm. Then, with his heart pounding louder than his footsteps, Jack stepped toward the woman, choosing humanity over fear. Jack's hands shook as he reached for the ropes. They were coarse and dug deep into the young woman's skin, leaving angry red marks. She flinched at his touch, fear flashing in her eyes, as though unsure if he meant to harm or save her. "It's okay," Jack whispered gently, "I'm here to help." His voice was low, steady, the kind a father uses to calm a frightened child. Slowly, carefully, he worked the knots loose, his calloused fingers burning from the effort. The moment the final rope gave way, her knees buckled. Jack caught her before she hit the ground, holding her trembling frame against him. She was cold, her breath shallow, her eyes filled with a mix of shame and terror. His daughter, watching quietly from a few steps away, ran to them and slipped her tiny hand into the woman's. "You're safe now," she said with the innocent certainty only a child could carry. The woman tried to speak, her voice broken. Between sobs, fragments spilled out, how she had been targeted, punished for power she never abused, dragged into a nightmare that wasn't hers to bear. Jack didn't press for details. He simply shook his head and said softly, "None of that matters right now. What matters is you're alive, and you're not alone." For the first time, her eyes met his without fear. In that fragile moment, beneath the rising sun, a stranger's life was lifted out of despair by the compassion of a man who had nothing to give, except his humanity. Days passed, and life seemed to return to its usual rhythm for Jack. He went back to his night shifts, packing lunches for his daughter, and walking the same quiet road home. But something about that morning in the woods lingered in his mind, the desperate eyes of the young woman, the weight of her trembling in his arms. He hadn't expected to see her again. To him, helping had never been about reward. It was just the right thing to do. One evening, as Jack set a simple dinner on the table, a knock echoed at the door. He opened it cautiously and froze. There she stood, no longer the broken figure from the tree, but polished and composed, her presence commanding yet gentle. She was the woman he had saved, though now she looked every bit the CEO she truly was. "I had to find you," she said, her voice steadier than before, though her eyes glistened with emotion. "That night, you gave me something I didn't think still existed, kindness without condition." Jack shifted uneasily, glancing at his daughter, who peeked out from behind him with wide, curious eyes. He shrugged, almost embarrassed. Anyone would have done the same. She shook her head firmly. "No. Not anyone. Most people would have walked away." Her voice cracked as she continued, "You saved my life. How can I ever repay you?" Jack looked down at his daughter, then back at her, a humble smile tugging at his lips. "Just be kind to someone else when they need it. That's enough." The woman's eyes filled with tears at his words. No one had ever asked so little of her, not in a world where wealth and power seemed to measure every interaction. For a long moment, she just stood there, taking in the simplicity of his request, and then she smiled, a soft, grateful smile that carried more weight than any deal she had ever signed. But Jack's act of compassion had touched her deeper than he could imagine. A week later, she returned, not with bodyguards or grand gestures, but with opportunity. She sat at Jack's warm kitchen table, looked at him and his daughter, and said, "You gave me a second chance at life. Let me give your little girl a chance at a future." She offered Jack a stable job with dignity, one that would allow him to spend more time with his daughter, and promised to cover the child's education. Jack was stunned, his throat tightening as he struggled to respond. He had saved her because it was human, not because he expected anything in return. Yet here was proof that kindness, even from the most ordinary hands, could ripple outward in ways unimaginable. As his daughter hugged the woman, giggling with innocent joy, Jack felt his chest swell with something beyond relief, hope. Hope that maybe the world wasn't as broken as it seemed. And in that quiet room, it became clear, compassion costs nothing, but it can change everything. Would you like me to now combine all 5 scenes into one flowing, polished short story narration, around 600 to 700 words, so it feels ready for storytelling or a YouTube voiceover?